Ways, in as far away as possible. I liked the class last night.
Yeah.
It was very interesting. I know I can understand where you said it's just totally different from what you had before, and you didn't really know how to approach it. But you did a good job. You did a good job.
I think the later classes in a certain way are even more exciting and interesting
Okay.
to a certain degree.
Oh, did you send out the link with the song?
No, I'll have to. No, the link you're saying for the videos. That's I just sent out the email, like the recap email. There's a link, like in the the link
The JLI, yeah.
/ whatever, and there you have every lesson. You have all the PowerPoints and videos and everything is there.
Okay.
It was
Okay.
interesting. They had the Cardinals on and they were singing. It sounded just like the music you played. Well, the guy was a
So
priest before.
good morning. We're going to finish today, hopefully, chapter 40, which in a sense concludes the current section that we're learning in Tanya. If you remember, we started a number of chapters ago, I believe chapter 35, we started a discussion about mitzvahs. And what our purpose in this world is. And we spoke about the last 5-6 chapters we've been talking about the mitzvahs as they comprise two elements: the mitzvah itself, which is usually action, sometimes speech, or sometimes even thought, versus the kavana, right, the intent. And they tell the story, and it could be we mentioned the story in the past, of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev. He was a colleague of the Alter Rebbe. He's known as the attorney on behalf of the Jewish people. He would always stick up for the Jewish people when it came to heavenly decrees. And he once learned the profession of ritual slaughtering. He became a shoichet. Now, when you become a shoichet, you have to learn all the laws of slaughter. These are, basic laws, what type of knife, all the details. But because he was a Kabbalist and a student of the Maggid of Mezrich, a disciple of the Baal Shem Tov, he studied all the mystical meanings behind all the details as well. So the first opportunity he had to actually slaughter a chicken, he held the chalaf, the knife in his hand, and he started making the blessing. But he made the blessing with all of the kavanas, all of the intentions and all of the meditations that Kabbalah associates with it. And when he opened his eyes, when he finished the blessing, the chicken had long lifted its wings and soared away. There was no chicken left. He was looking for the chicken. Now, the story is like a little of a comical story. However, if we're bringing the story into Tanya, let's ask 2 Tanya questions on the story. First of all, why did the chicken fly away only after he had the kavana? In other words, every other shoichet that makes a blessing on shachting the chicken doesn't fly away. So why suddenly he had kavana did the chicken fly away? And number 2, if he was able to have all of the kavanas on the blessing for the shechita, why did he need the chicken afterwards? He accomplished the mitzvah, so to speak, right? He had all the kavanas, even more than the average shoichet has. So what was missing? Why did he need the chicken? So this is sort of where we're going to close off the conversation we've been having till now. What's more important, or what's primary? What comes first, the mitzvah or the kavana? The chicken or the shoichet?
Well, is it the same thing? If you say the blessing over the wine, but never drink the wine?
The same idea, yeah.
Same
Yeah.
concept.
Yeah.
Good analogy.
It's the same thing for anything, yeah. Except the wine you would expect to be there. By the way, when you take a drink out of a drinking fountain, I was taught as a kid, at least you should turn on the drinking fountain to make sure it's working before you make the blessing, because it has happened that people made a blessing, turn on the drinking fountain, and there's nothing there. But better to use a cup, fill up a cup so you have the water, because it is also possible the water, there's a little water left, you turn it on, it works. You make the bracha and you turn it on, there's going to be nothing there. So it is possible, but usually if you have a cup in front of you, you make a bracha, there's no reason the cup should, it's not like the cup has wings and flies away. Whereas the chicken has wings and flies away. So the
Just to follow up on Jay, is there sometimes, and I can't remember what instances where in shul that they would make the blessing and the breakthrough of Goffman, but they give it to a child to take, and I'm not sure the circumstances.
That would probably be during the 3 weeks, or at least the 9 days before Tisha B'Av, when the custom is we don't drink wine except on Shabbos. So Havdalah is after Shabbos, so you would give the wine to drink to a child.
Okay.
Oh,
Or minor. Okay, so last week we raised the idea that if God is found everywhere equally, so why do we call some worlds higher worlds and some worlds lower worlds? If God is present in Atzilus and in our world equally, so what makes Atzilus higher or lower? And we explained that even though God is present everywhere, but the world receives more of God's energy and light in the higher worlds than the lower worlds. And also the revelation of that energy is more revealed in the higher worlds than the lower worlds. Because we find ourselves in the lowest world, so the energy, the divine energy, is minimal that we receive. God's presence is here just as much as in Atzilus, but we don't receive that. We're not capable of absorbing that divine energy. We're only able to absorb a minute amount of it, and even the minute amount that we're able to absorb is concealed. Yeah, that's what we explained last week, 2 weeks ago, in the beginning of the chapter. So in other words, when we do a mitzvah, the mitzvah is in the physical world. So how can this mitzvah be elevated and connect to God? So we explained that the solution to this is the kavanah. Why? Because the action of the mitzvah is in which world? In this world, right? Which world is the kavanah in? Well, that depends what the kavanah is. Is the kavanah, is my intention total selflessness, this is what God wants, then it's an atzilus. If my intention in the mitzvah is an intellectual one, then it's in bria. If my intention is an emotional one, it's in yetzirah. So because my kavanah is associated with a certain world, so the kavanah elevates so when I do the mitzvah with a kavanah, I'm sort of marrying the mitzvah, the action, and the kavanah, and so the action is elevated to the world where the kavanah is found. What happens if I do a mitzvah without kavanah? Then it's in this world. What happens if I do a mitzvah with negative kavanah? Then I lower it to the lower worlds, and then I have to do the mitzvah again with a high, right? I have to elevate it again, like we mentioned last time. But the question is, why does it work that way? Why does the kavanah elevate the mitzvah? Maybe the mitzvah should downgrade the kavanah. In other words, we're saying that the kavanah, let's say your kavanah is in bria. So when you do a mitzvah in asiya, in this world, because your kavanah is in bria, the kavanah elevates the mitzvah to bria. Maybe because the mitzvah is in asiya, the mitzvah should downgrade the kavanah to asiya. Why does it work the other way? So usually if you have two things that marry each other, and this could be two people or two anything, right? Two tables that you stick together and marry together, so to speak, make into one will inevitably follow the other. Which one, who follows who? So usually the result follows the cause, okay? So if I ask you to marry me and you say yeah, 9 times out of 10, that power dynamic, and it doesn't always have to be a negative power dynamic. Every two people, there's going to be one more powerful than the other. Otherwise, it won't work. It'll just clash all the time. You have to have a hierarchy. That power dynamic, in almost all instances, will say that because I initiated this, because I am the provider, so to speak, therefore you will follow me where where I go. If I have to move to this place for business, you're going to follow me, right? 9 times out of 10, that's how it works. And again, it's not a negative thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing because that keeps a relationship going, unless it becomes abusive. And obviously that's not a good thing. So we have a marriage here between kavana and mitzvah. Okay. Now who's going to schlep who where? So it depends. Who is the cause and who is the effect? 9 times out of 10, what's the cause? What's the first step? The kavana, right? I am in the highest level. I am totally devoted to God, like a child, like a spouse, and therefore I do whatever God wants me to do. I don't even think twice about it. So now I'm putting on tefillin. I'm doing it only because God wants me to. So why am I putting on the tefillin? Because of the kavana. So the kavana elevates the mitzvah. This would mean that if I have kavana because I'm doing the mitzvah anyways, instead of doing it and not being present, let me at least have some sort of kavana while doing the mitzvah. So here, the kavana may be downgraded, may be degraded because what's the cause? Is the mitzvah. In other words, why am I having kavana? If I call you to join me for a minyan, and you decide to do me a favor and come to the minyan, but you're going to sit there and just read the words, you have no intent, you have no interest in being there. But you realize, you're going to be sitting here for an hour, you might as well enjoy some of it. So you can open the siddur and you're going to start having some kavana. So there, the kavana is a result of the mitzvah. So there, the kavana may be downgraded, but usually the kavana is the cause. So the kavana elevates the mitzvah. Yeah? Does that make sense? Okay, let's look here a little bit and see this in the Alter Rebbe's words. We're on page 584. We're at the 15th of Nisan for a regular year. But in the case of prayer recited with kavana and Torah studied with kavana lishma, for its sake, because until now we were talking about no kavana or negative kavana, right? That's what we discussed last time. But if you do have kavana, the kavana is clothed in. In other words, it permeates the mitzvah, which is the letters of speech, since it is their source and root. The kavana is the source and root of the mitzvah. For he speaks these words for and because of this kavana. Therefore, the kavana elevates the words to its own level, meaning, in this case, to the 10 sefirot of either Yetzira or Bria, which is 99.9% of where tzaddikim reside, depending on the type of kavana. Whether a kavana of intellectual fear and love, in which case they ascend to Bria, or natural fear and love, which elevates them to Yetzira, as explained above. There, in the Sefirot, the Ein Sof light shines forth and is revealed. So here we have a revealed marriage between God and the mitzvah that you did. Even though the mitzvah you did is here in this world, but the kavana elevated it to that world. And there's an open relationship, there's a revealed relationship between God and the mitzvah. Meaning, the blessed divine will vested in the letters and in the kavana of the Torah that one studies, or the divine will in prayer and in its kavana, or in a mitzvah and in its kavana. This Ein Sof of the divine will radiates in the Sefirot with an infinitely great brightness that can by no means shine forth and be revealed while the letters of Torah and prayer and the mitzvah are still in this physical world. Now, this couldn't be possible in our world. Neither the radiance itself that shines forth in the Sefirot, nor any part of it can be revealed in this physical world. Our world just isn't capable of absorbing such intense light. It's like if you connected your power, your home power to a power grid without a substate, without a converter, without some sort of converter. This disparity between the respective levels of radiance of the divine will in the Sefirot and in this world will remain. So in other words, this distance that you can't connect it to will remain until the era of the end of days, when the world will rise out of its materiality and the glory of God will be revealed for all flesh to behold, as explained above at length. In other words, when Mashiach comes. Now, here we have, it's the only place in Tanya where in one section of a chapter, first, I don't even know if there's another chapter that has 3 footnotes. But this is the one place, only place now where the three are on one page. They're literally within a half a page of each other. These notes are usually Kabbalistic in nature. Yeah. So we'll read it. There is what to digest here, but we're not going to go too deep into it since it'll take away from the general flow. But I think it is important to mention. The Alter Rebbe says here, as explained above at length. Yeah, what was explained above at length? In other words, where all the mitzvahs, where the mitzvahs are performed, where they can be elevated to, what they can accomplish, etc. Okay, so the Alter Rebbe is going to address an important point over here. We know that what brings blessings into this world? Doing mitzvahs, studying Torah, praying, right? Praying to God brings blessing into this world. So here's the question. Why is it that when me or you pray for something, God's answer isn't always yes, sir? God listens to our prayer, but he doesn't always respond in the way we would like him to. Whereas when a tzaddik prays, 10 times out of 10, God listens to him. The Talmud says that tzaddik decrees and God fulfills. And that's why there were certain, well, I shouldn't say that's why, but there were certain times when people would ask tzaddikim for blessings and they weren't given. And people tried very hard and sometimes it wasn't given. There's an extreme example of this where there was a Jew that every year had the merit of being by the Rebbe for the high holidays, and he would give the Rebbe, it's a great honor to open the ark and give the Torah to the first person to hold the Torah by Kol Nidre. And he would come from Israel every year, and he had this honor. And every year the Rebbe would bless him afterwards that he should, their Leben to live till next year to be able to repeat this tradition. And that was sort of an unofficial guarantee he had that, okay, I've got another year left. He was an older man, or he wasn't very old, but he was an older man. One year, the Rebbe didn't just told him thank you for giving the Torah, but didn't give him the blessing, and he pushed. He was waiting for the blessing, and finally, the Rebbe said something. I don't remember exactly if the Rebbe said the traditional blessing, or either way, he knew that his time is up soon. And he did come back the next year, and during the time when the ark was opened, he had a heart attack. It took time for the paramedics to come, and it took over a half hour to take him out of 770 before they pronounced him dead, because they didn't. If they would pronounce him dead in the shul, it would create pandemonium for all the Kohanim that are there that couldn't be under the same roof. So the Rebbe wanted they should first take him out. Anyhow, it took about close to an hour that everyone was sitting there waiting for Kol Nidre to start. So he made it, but not. Anyhow, why? Because why didn't the tzaddik just come and say everyone should live forever? A tzaddik knows that God does have certain plans, and yet tzaddikim found it necessary at certain times to give blessings to create new. So how come by a tzaddik it works? Just to go off, just another story came to mind, which I think brings out this point. There was a Jew that lived very, very old, over 100 years old. This is going back over 200 years. Those times it was almost unheard of to live so old. And the excuse he had, so to speak, was that the Baal Shem Tov gave him a blessing for long life. And he was a Jew. He was known, I don't remember his first name, but he was known as whatever his name was. Let's say his name was Moshe the Emissar, Moshe the truthful one, because he was very, very careful to say the truth. The example that's given is that when his students were, like even his students were taught, ingrained with this, that if they walked in from the outside drenching because they was soaking because it was pouring rain outside. And someone asked them, "Is it raining?" They would say, "I don't know, but when I was outside, it was raining." Because it could be it stopped in the moment they walked into the door. That's the level of care that they have with their words. So there was about 200 years ago, there was a libel, blood libel against two great Jewish, the tzaddikim, they were Slavita brothers. They owned a printing press in Slavita. Most Torah books were printed in their printing press. And there was an accusation, a blood libel against them. And the government had said that if they listed two rabbis would testify that these two Jews are innocent, they would believe them. In other words, these rabbis were known for their truthfulness, that if they would testify that these two rabbis are innocent, they would exonerate them. And one of them was this Jew, who's already, I think, over 100 years old, again, from this blessing of the Baal Shem to have long life. And he was conflicted because if he would refuse to testify, not because he thinks, he would say, listen, I just can't say anything because I wasn't there, although I believe 100% they're innocent. He couldn't testify to it. So, but he could not testify either. He couldn't testify, he could not testify. So he lay down on a bed and he prayed to God to take away the Baal Shem Tov's blessing. And he passed. That just goes to show the power of, which again goes back to the Talmud, that it says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gozer, God decrees and a tzaddik can nullify, and a tzaddik can decree and God fulfills. In other words, God can't nullify the decree of a tzaddik, whereas a tzaddik can nullify the decree of God. Okay. So why is it, so if a tzaddik, if prayer and Torah and blessing can bring down great blessings, so why is it that when me and you daven, we don't accomplish that? And a tzaddik davens, he does. Based on what we just read, it seems quite obvious, right? When I daven, my davening stays right here. It doesn't connect with, it doesn't go up to where, in other words, where is the blessing generated when I daven? It's generated in Atzilus or in Bria. But because my davening is here, I have no way to access it. So every time you daven, God answers yes. But that yes is stuck up there. You have no way of accessing it because your kavanah either was lacking or was stuck at a lower level. But the tzaddik who has kavanah, that reaches to that level where the blessing is generated, is able to marry, so to speak, the kavanah and the mitzvah, and therefore draw down that new blessing. Let's look at this. Okay, it's not going to be as direct, but let's read this footnote over here on page 586. There, in the higher worlds, there also shines forth and is revealed the supernal union affected by every mitzvah and by Torah study, namely the union of God's midot. These midot fuse with each other, and the gevurot, the attributes of severity, are sweetened by the chasadim, the attributes of kindness. Through the hour of will, favor, of the blessed Ein Sof, in other words, the revelation of the will of the Ein Sof, which shines forth and reveals itself in abundant and intense revelation. How does this will arouse itself? How does this new blessing come about? By reason of the arousal of man below. In other words, when we instigate it, so it's aroused. How do we instigate it? Consisting of the performance of a mitzvah or occupation in Torah, in which the supernal will of the blessed Ein Sof is clothed. But the main unity caused by Torah and mitzvot takes place far higher in the world of Atzilus, where the core and essence of God's midot are united with their emanator, the Ein Sof, blessed be He. And there, in Atzilus, is found the core and essence of the supernal will of the blessed Ein Sof, of which a mere glimmer radiates in Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, in each of these worlds according to its rank. Okay, so the main blessing is stuck up there. Now, although the soul of the person engaging in this Torah study or mitzvah does not stem from Atzilus, nevertheless, he is able to effect unity in the midot of Atzilus, because the supernal will, which is clothed in this mitzvah, and in the case of Torah, it is not merely clothed in it, but furthermore, it is indeed the very halacha and Torah that he is studying. This supernal will is godliness and is the Ein Sof light of the emanator, of the Sefirot of Atzilus, since he and his will are one. And this supernal will is actually the source of the midot, since it was by his will that he emanated his midot, which are united with himself. And therefore, by means of the revelation of his will, caused by one's engaging in Torah or in a particular mitzvah, the midot fuse with each other, and the gevurot are sweetened by chasadim as this hour of revealed favorable will. In other words, every time you want to create something new, you have to fuse together two opposites, right? A man and a woman. You take two men together, two women together, you're not going to get a baby. But if you take two opposites, even when it comes to business partners, if you take two business partners and they're both risk takers, you may not get a very good result. If they're both very, very conservative, you're also not going to get a good result. You need two opposites that somehow figure out a way to work together to magnify the results. Anytime you want to create something new, you need two opposites. So because here we have chesed and gevura, how do we get the two to come together? By doing a mitzvah. That's God's will. That mitzvah creates this energy, but for that energy to come down here, we have to figure out a way to get there, so to speak. Okay. That's a little mystical, but we'll continue. Getting back to what we were talking about, that the kavana and the mitzvah, the kavana elevates the mitzvah. I told you many stories about the concept of a mitzvah being stuck down here, the shul full of prayers. Remember the Baal Shem Tov said a similar story of a Jew that saw in a book once. It says if you avoid dvarim b'teilim, which means b'teilim are like useless, basically futile words. If you avoid futile words for 40 days, you can merit the revelation of Elijah the prophet. So for 40 days, he was careful not to talk to anyone. He only prayed and davened and studied Torah. That's the only words he said. But he didn't merit that revelation at the end of 40 days. He came running to the Baal Shem Tov. So Baal Shem Tov asked him, tell me, did you daven during these 40 days? He said, yeah. Did you study Torah during these 40 days? He said, yeah. So that must have been your Dvarim B'Teilim, he said. In other words, the words of prayer must have been lacking kavana. If they're lacking kavana, then there's sort of nothing, no substance to them. Now, they were a mitzvah, as we'll soon see. The action of the mitzvah was still there, but they're stuck here. In other words, they're Dvarim B'Teilim. One day you can elevate them when you daven with kavana. But right now, they're stuck here. They're not, you didn't spend 40 days without any futile words.
So you go that whole time, and then all of a sudden, you have one day with kavana really elevated, all the past.
That's
goes
what
up with it.
that's what we discussed last time, why it's so important to do mitzvahs and pray and study even without kavana, because then if you do have kavana once, you elevate everything. But if you don't do it because there's no kavana and you feel like a faker because you're doing it, then one day you're going to have kavana, you're going to realize, wait, but now I have nothing to elevate because I didn't do the mitzvah or pray any other time in the past. Okay, I think at this point we can sort of get back to the original question and figure out how do we get, remember the opening verse of Tanya in the cover page of Tanya? What was the verse upon which Tanya is meant to address? What is the verse that we're trying to internalize? It's a verse from Deuteronomy. Ki karov elecha hadavar me'od. This thing, which thing? To fear God is very close to you. Beficha ubilvavcha la'asoto. In your mouth and in your heart to do it. Now, in your mouth and in your heart, and to do it is extremes, right? How do you get your heart and in your mouth, your heart and to do it? Sometimes I do it without heart. Sometimes I have a heart, but I don't do it, right? It doesn't always come together. So how do we balance the two? How do we connect the two? And how do we figure out which one overpowers which, if there's a need to know that, which one is the primary? So in chapters 35 to 37, we addressed action. And there we amplified the importance of action. Now that's what brings Mashiach. That's why the world was created. That's why we have a physical body, right? The candle, the example, the candle on the neshama and the body is the fuel for the candle. And when we do a mitzvah, that gives the fuel to the neshama, and that's the purpose for which we're here. The purpose for which we're here is to make the physical world a dwelling place for God. The focus was on the action. Then in the last 3 chapters, we spent a lot of time focusing on the element of the kavana and how without the kavana, the mitzvah is stuck here, is almost like a waste of time, almost like a waste of time. At the same time, a mitzvah without kavana is still a mitzvah, whereas kavana without the mitzvah is nothing. Yeah? And we discussed a lot how the kavana, which worlds the kavana is connected to. Okay, so at the bottom line, what's more important? And the reason this is a practical question is because what should I spend my time focusing on? Should I spend my time focusing on learning the code of Jewish law and learning how to do the mitzvahs? Or learning Kabbalah or Hasidus and learning why I'm doing the mitzvahs and what intention I should have?
Doing
Now,
the mitzvahs.
you could do both, but which one should I start with? And then on every day, the rest of my life, when I wake up in the morning, should I first try to get myself in the mood? Or should I, but because of that, things may get delayed and may be avoided? Or should I first make sure action is done? Yeah. So the Alter Rebbe is going to connect Kabbalah with Halacha. And here's how he's going to do it. We explained that what's the Kavana? Kavana ultimately is broken down into 2, love or fear, right? I can do the mitzvah because I want to connect to God, or because I'm scared of what will happen if I don't connect to God. That's fear in its physical sense, or awe. Right? But we explained that these 2 feelings are like 2 wings that propel the bird upwards. Okay, so the mitzvah is the body of the bird, the kavana are the wings. Now the Alter Rebbe is going to turn to halacha. Halacha means law. And he's going to say, what does halacha say about body and wings of a bird? We know that a mitzvah is the body. The kavanah is the wings. Okay, now what does the Torah tell us? If I have wings and I have the body of a bird, which one is more vital? Which one is more primary? So which halacha would we look at? In the halacha of a treifa. What's a treifa? What's a treif animal?
It's going to die within a year.
Oh, the proper definition of treif is not the food you buy in the store. It could be, but the proper definition of a treifa, or the original definition of a treifa, is a live animal or bird that is not kosher anymore, even though it's a kosher species. Why? Because it was tareif. It was attacked either by another animal, by a human being, or it had an accident. And now it is going to die as a result of whatever it was inflicted with within 12 months. So it could have been, I went hunting and shot a deer, and this deer will eventually die either in a day or in 10 months, but it will eventually die as a result. In other words, it wasn't a non-lethal shot. It was a lethal shot. It could be the animal developed some sort of illness inside of it, which is why we look after the animal slaughtered. The insides are searched for illnesses, not illnesses that necessarily the USDA looks for. We're looking for illnesses that don't affect the quality of the meat. We're looking for illnesses that could have killed the animal within 12 months. Or sometimes you see, these videos of a wild animal will attack prey, and the prey gets away. Sometimes it wasn't such a vicious attack. Sometimes it was an attack that the prey is going to die. The question is, how far will it get away? Okay, that animal's treif. So now, when it comes to a bird, if a bird is injured in its body or in its head, then it's treif, right? What about if you find a bird in the street, kosher bird, and it's missing its wings? Totally, they're gone. Someone clipped off the wings. Tore off the wings. There's no wings anymore. So the halacha is the chicken's kosher. Why? Because a bird, because a chicken bird, because the bird can survive without wings. Now, in the wild, it might not survive without wings just because now it's easier target. But if you brought it home, it would survive just fine without wings. It's crippled. Okay, it needs a wheelchair now. It can't maneuver the way a regular chicken would, but it's a non-vital organ, so to speak. So the Alter Rebbe uses this halacha to inform the Kabbalah side of it. The Kabbalah we had that the mitzvah is the body, the kavanah are the wings. Halacha tells us that what's primary? The body. The body is a vital organ, whereas the wings aren't vital. However, remember that a chicken without wing, a bird without wings, what type of bird is that? Right? So you won't, we're not saying it's not important. We're saying it's not vital. Okay. Let's see here. We're on page, yeah, I'm not. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip the next two footnotes. If we have time at the end, we'll go back to it. This explains clearly why fear and love are figuratively called wings, as it is written, and with two wings he flies. This is what the Zohar says, alluding to the two midot of love and fear. As Reb Chaim Vital of blessed memory stated in Shar HaYichudim, chapter 11, that wings are for a bird what arms are for a man. Just as it is written, chesed, corresponding to love, is the right arm, and gevura, fear, the left arm. Similarly, the wings represent these two midot. It is also explained in Tikkunei Zohar that those who engage in Torah and mitzvot out of fear and love are called children. Otherwise, in other words, if their Torah and mitzvot lack fear or love of God, they are called fledglings who cannot fly. In other words, children, not human children, but full developed offspring of the bird have wings that can fly, whereas fledglings, their wings aren't developed yet. They can't be considered, in other words, children is where they have independence. The fledglings are totally dependent on others because they can't fly. They're missing that element. So if a person does a mitzvah without kavanah, that mitzvah is like a fledgling. Whereas if he does a mitzvah with kavanah, that mitzvah can fly on its own because it has the kavanah, the wings, to give it lift, to make it elevate.
Yeah, but how, okay. I
Well,
can
but-
decide
yeah.
that I'm gonna do a mitzvah.
Well, but let's ask the question when we're done reading this idea. So we're going to turn out to page 591. He's going to explain it. The wings of a bird are not its main components. Its life does not depend on them at all. For as the Mishnah implies, a bird whose wings were removed is kosher. It doesn't render it treif. Rather, the main parts are its head and the rest of its body. The wings merely serve the head and the body, enabling them to fly. Okay, that's the metaphor. Likewise, with Torah and mitzvot, in other words, the Torah and the mitzvah itself, they constitute the essential supernal union by the revelation of supernal will which they cause. Whereas fear and love, like wings, merely elevate the Torah and mitzvot to a place where this will, the blessed Ein Sof light, and this unity can be revealed, namely Yetzirah and Bria. Okay, so in other words, the mitzvah and the Torah itself is the body. The wings are supporting elements. And therefore, when it comes down to the bottom line, the primary focus has to be on the actual mitzvah. And that's why, as a preparation for a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah, the most important thing, and you see this by the Rebbe again and again, the Rebbe, it's fascinating. Usually, any time there was an opportunity to boost Torah study or mitzvah, the Rebbe was all for it. When it came to bar mitzvah prep, the Rebbe discouraged his Hasidim and as well as others from reading the Torah portion for their bar mitzvah. Discouraged in unequivocal terms. Why would you think?
I know that.
You don't have the kavanah.
I know that when my nephews were practicing for their bar mitzvah, when it came to Hashem's name, they wouldn't practice.
Nothing to do with that.
But then when he came to his bar mitzvah, he was so.
He made a
used to
mistake.
saying it.
Nothing to do with that.
I thought it was the fact of being very, very careful.
Yeah, that's not the reason that Rebbe gave for this.
Okay.
The reason that Rebbe gave was 9 times out of 10, maybe even 9.5 times out of 10. I don't know how you do that when it comes to humans. But 9 times out of 10, a bar mitzvah boy will spend close to a year preparing their bar mitzvah Torah portion. And 9 times out of 10, that will be the only portion they ever study and the only portion they ever read. So the amount of money, time, and agony that a child goes to, well, the money is the parents' investment, but the amount of agony a child is exposed to, the amount of time they spend and money that's spent on what turns out to be only a performance, as opposed to something that will serve them long term, that Rebbe felt was not just a waste of time and money, but it would bear negative results on the child coming out of that. I'm telling you, from all of my classmates that studied a Torah portion to read at their bar mitzvah, never read again, except for that Torah portion. I did not study to read a Torah portion, although I knew how to read the Torah beforehand. I didn't study a Torah portion for my bar mitzvah, and in yeshiva, I read the Torah every Monday and Thursday for years. And today, I know a lot of the Torah, and I could read it almost without notice. I can make my way through a Torah book. But for a year before my bar mitzvah, my father made me. I studied Tanya. I studied 100 chapters in the Code of Jewish Law. The Rebbe wanted that children should focus on studying practical Jewish law, because that's what they're going to have to do after. That's what's going to guide them the day after. Because the day they become bar mitzvah, they have to know how to do everything. Just like when someone converts, we want them to know everything before. We make them go through 3 years of training before to know how to observe all the holidays and everything that comes up. A bar mitzvah boy and a bar mitzvah girl should also have at least a year where they go through the Code of Jewish Law and all the laws to know how to live a Jewish life. And the Rebbe felt that focusing on these types of endeavors were a much greater investment and would bear much greater results than just preparing. Now, I am not suggesting that you should take this and now stop teaching kids, because at the end of the day, for someone who isn't in a religious setting, someone who isn't, so to get them to come and teach them the Code of Jewish Law, first of all, the parents may not buy into it. Also, there isn't a performance element, and if you take that away, then who knows if they'll observe the bar mitzvah, etc. I'm not suggesting that what the Rebbe said should, but it's something to ponder and figure out, how do we change that. I know kids that refuse to have a bar mitzvah because they don't know. They have to know how to read. They have to know how to read the Torah. They don't want to have a bar mitzvah where they can't read the Torah. And that's a tragedy, right? The kids that didn't go to Hebrew school didn't have that education. Anyhow, regardless, that's a side note. The point of the matter, why did I bring up this idea? Because we're speaking about how knowing the practical mitzvahs and how that affects our day-to-day life is so vital and so important.
But then isn't the same thing true on your Haftorah? I found a Haftorah very difficult. I had to really study hard to do.
Technically, it's the same thing, except for Haftarah. And this is, I think, where I would make the differentiation. A bar mitzvah boy that learns how to read the Torah can learn his parsha on his own. If he needs a tutor for the parsha, that means he doesn't really know how to read the Torah. But even such a boy can read the Haftarah without much effort if they learn properly, because you have the notes inside, the vowels. You don't have to. It's a whole different type of preparation. But still, if for the child it's a traumatizing event, if it's difficult and if it takes a lot of effort, that effort would probably be better invested in other things. That's why Levi didn't prepare a Torah portion, Torah reading.
The Torah anyway.
Fine, but he didn't. That wasn't what he spent his time. When he read one aliyah for his, when we did a Torah reading the week after, he prepared that after his bar mitzvah. He prepared it on his own. Thursday, Friday, he prepared it, the Haftarah and the Maftir. But we didn't make him spend. It wasn't part of the prep for the. In other words, the prep for the bar mitzvah should be prep for life. Now, to teach a child to teach Trupp I would say that could be part of bar mitzvah prep. This is teaching him for life. Teach him trup. No, teach him the notes and how to sing them.
That's the hard part.
But teaching him a Torah portion, that's almost like it's a different, it's teaching someone not how to draw, but how to draw a specific painting. You don't want to go to a class that just teaches you how to draw this painting. You want to go to a class that's going to teach you how to draw.
Right.
Okay. Just a story to illustrate a drop, and not this point specifically, but more the broader point that we were addressing earlier. There was a big chassid of the Rebbe Marash, the fourth Lubavitch Rebbe. He was a very close friend, study partner, and chassid of the fifth Lubavitch Rebbe. And he died at a very young age. One of the reasons, practically, is he engrossed himself in his own personal spiritual journey, and as a result ended up fasting a lot, even though that's not necessarily the Hasidic approach, but he fasted a lot to become more in touch with his spirituality. As he was deathly ill, he expressed that it wasn't worth all the years of spiritual elevation if it's going to mean that he's going to die and be able to put on tefillin one less time. In other words, all of this effort he put in, if because of that he's going to die a day earlier and therefore not be able to put on tefillin one more time, it's not going to be worth it. In other words, at the end of his life, he's expressing how at the end of the day, what's more important? The mitzvah, not all the spiritual kavanah that went into it. After he died, one of the Hasidim that heard this said, such a revelation can only come to a person who spent 40 plus years working on himself to get to that place. In other words, there's a dichotomy here. There's, on the one hand, we have the mitzvah, on the other hand, there's the kavanah, and there's this constant pull, because the more you focus on one side, you lose focus on the other side. They're both important, but at the end of the day, the mitzvah is the most important. And therefore, if the kavanah will take away from the mitzvah, we have to sacrifice the kavanah for the mitzvah, not the other way around.
But,
Okay.
okay, I can make a decision what mitzvahs I'm going to do. I can do that. Okay, but how do you even prepare or whatever, I don't know even how to put it, that I can do kavana? In other words, how can I do kavana? How do I, and plus higher levels of kavana, you low level.
What do you mean, how can you do it?
I mean, it's.
You're saying, how can you do it without a mitzvah, or how can you?
No. Mitzvahs I can pick. I can say, I'm making a donation today, I'm doing this today, I'm saying these prayers today, I'm doing
So,
that.
but what's kavanah?
Kavana is if I'm doing it for what reason I'm doing it.
Right, so you develop the intention. It takes a lot of meditation and study to develop the intention. If you spend your days, weeks, and months thinking about the greatness of God and your nothingness, which is today's time, in today's Tanya, we're going to get to it soon when we speak about the next chapter is love and fear. But when you develop a relationship and a feeling for God, so that's the developing of the kavanah. Now, when you have a love for God, so now your mitzvah will be a result of that kavanah. It's not something you create in a day, but it is the basic level of kavanah you can have today. When you put on tefillin, instead of putting on tefillin because you're worried what's going to be the punishment if you don't put on tefillin because you want to experience a mitzvah, you want to experience God, you want to do something good. You grow and you come to Tanya and learn more Tanya and learn Hasidus and think more about it. And the more you think about it and the more you internalize it, the more kavanah you have. Okay, there's one last thing we have to address here before we finish the chapter. And that is, okay, basically what we said till now is that the mitzvah is the main thing, the love and the fear, the kavanah is secondary. What's the most important prayer we say every day, twice a day? Shema. What's the first verse of after the Shema? The Ahavta, you should love the Lord your God. This is one of the 613 commandments. So love and fear are not wings. They are part of the 613. They are mitzvot. So how is the Alter Rebbe saying here that the kavana, which is the emotions, that they are secondary when they are actually mitzvot themselves? Understand? That's what the Alter Rebbe is going to address here. That it's true, these mitzvahs in a way are different than the other mitzvahs. Every other mitzvah, the mitzvah itself is the purpose of the mitzvah. The love and the fear are sort of additional. But tefillin, the mitzvah is performed by the mitzvah. Love and fear, those mitzvahs are performed when the result of the love and fear is performed. In other words, the love and fear themselves aren't a mitzvah. If I love God and I don't do any mitzvahs as a result of that love, I haven't fulfilled the mitzvah of love and of loving God. If my heart doesn't beat faster and as a result doesn't do the mitzvah I'm supposed to do, then that mitzvah of love hasn't been fulfilled. Therefore, when it comes to love and fear, unlike other mitzvahs, where there's a discrepancy between the body of the mitzvah and the wings of the mitzvah, the kavana, in love and fear, there is no body without wings. The wings are its body. Let's look at that inside on page 594. Although fear and love are also among the 613 mitzvot, they are nevertheless described as mere wings for other mitzvot. Why is this? Because the goal of love is the service of God resulting from this love. Because love without service, right? If I love someone and I don't do anything for them or tell them anything, what is that worth? In other words, a love that is not a means to an end, but an end in itself, is a love which experiences delights, a supremely high level of love in which one delights in godliness. This is the nature of the world to come, and thus constitutes reward. In other words, when Mashiach comes, or even when your body, when your soul ascends on high, and it reaps the reward of its effort in this world during its lifetime, it experiences God, right? It experiences God without any mitzvahs. It can't do mitzvahs up there. So if it can't do mitzvahs, how does it experience God? It experiences a level of love in which no words have to, right? When you're married long enough and have a deep enough relationship, you can feel your spouse's love without any external expression. You don't need any words, actions, or nothing to convey the love. Sometimes you'll say you can see the love in their eyes. Here, it's not even love in their eyes. It permeates, but that's a level of love that a person can experience with God. Not really in a body, you can't really experience it because the body conceals that to a degree that it needs some form of expression. And therefore, we can't really experience that in this world. So, how do you do the mitzvah of love without wings? It's not possible. Love without wings, right? Tefillin without wings means I put on tefillin because the rabbi asked me to. That's tefillin without wings. What's love without wings? What is it? In this world, we can't really experience that. That's something you could experience in a spiritual world. But it is written today to do them. In other words, today, this life, in the time of action and service, our life now, and tomorrow in the world to come to receive their reward. Thus, in this life, the time of service, the love that leads to service is the love most prized. He, however, who has not attained to this level of savoring a foretaste of the world to come, and has not reached the level of a love which experiences delights, but whose soul yet yearns and thirsts for God and goes out to him all day long, and he does not quench his thirst for godliness with the water of Torah that is in front of him, such a person is comparable to one who stands in a river and cries, water, water to drink. Right? He's standing at the river. He doesn't even bend. He's still crying he's still thirsty for water. So we could be sitting and studying Torah all day, and still we feel that we're not connected to God. We still feel a distance from God, even though you just spent the last 12 hours one with God. We still feel distant. Thus the prophet laments over him, "Oh, all of you who thirst, go to the waters," on which our sages comment that water refers to Torah. For in its simple meaning, this verse is incomprehensible. He who is thirsty and desires to study Torah will surely do so of his own accord. Why does the prophet have to tell him go study Torah? Why must the prophet cry over him? Oh, clearly then, the verse refers to one who loves God and thirsts for him. And this matter is discussed elsewhere at length. I want to conclude. We skipped the notes. That's fine. I want to conclude with two things. First of all, a general conclusion and introduction. But there is a song from the Alter Rebbe that I never understood until I was preparing for this class. It's a song. It's more of a, the Alter Rebbe taught at least 10 songs that we know. And some of them are more, they're not fully developed songs. They're like things that he would pray with, tunes that he would pray with. So it's like a stanza, yeah. It's called a tnua, a stanza. And one of these types of songs has two verses. And the song goes like this. Ki ayol taroi galafike moyim vehoyu letoitafos beinei necha. And it just goes over and over. But the two verses are not connected. They seem to have no relationship. Ka'ayol tarig alafike moyim. You know what that means? It's from Psalms. It's like a ram. It's someone who's thirsty for water. Yeah? And v'hayu letotafot beinei nacha is the tefillin, right? To have the tefillin between your eyes. What's the connection? The Alter Rebbe is describing this struggle between someone who's yearning to love, he loves God so much, he's yearning, it's the kavanah element of it. But at the end of the day, you got to put on tefillin. At the end of the day, what's the most important thing? It's the mitzvah. This is the description of the purpose of our lives. This is Nadav and Avihu, this week's Torah portion. Right? After Aaron's sons died, why did they die? So Chassidus explains, because they had this tremendous outpouring of love to God, that they wanted to be so close to God that they didn't care about the consequences, and they brought incense offering that they weren't allowed to, and therefore they died. Their souls just wanted to depart from their body. Every one of our souls wants to leave. Our souls don't want to be here. They want to be with God. But God wants our soul to be here. So our soul should want to be here. Yeah, but if our soul wants to be here, it's not going to do its job because it wants to be here. It's going to get involved in the world. That's why we need a soul and a body. We need a soul that wants to be with God. We need a body that wants to be here. And we need to figure out a way to marry them together, that they should work together while still wanting their natural wants. The soul should still want to go to God. The body should still want to be here. And yet the body should do what God wants and the soul should do what God wants, which means be together and figure out a way to serve together. But the most important thing is making the dwelling place for God here in this world. And that can only be accomplished through a body, not a body with a soul, but not a soul with a body.
But that's why we have two souls. Because
Well,
one soul wants to be here,
Yeah,
the
but
other
the second soul and the body, we're conflating, because a body technically is just inanimate matter. So when we speak about the body, we're speaking about the animal soul, because the body without the animal soul is dead. It's matter. It's nothing. This concludes this section of Tanya. Next week, we're going to start the next section of Tanya, in which we're going to delve a lot deeper into love and awe. Love and fear, love and awe, and how to serve God with. Now that we know that action is the most important, and that's what we have to focus. Now we're going to learn, okay, but those who are ready to invest in kavanah, and for those mitzvahs that I've under my belt, I do the mitzvahs. I don't have to worry about, am I doing it properly? And the mitzvah is done. How can I grow this mitzvah and bring in more